Today we are going to talk about noob gains, or the changes that happen to you and your body as you begin training for endurance events. Welcome. We'll walk through why and how noob gains happen, and at the end we're also going to talk about how noob gains can actually be detrimental to your continued improvement. But first, before we get to all that, we're going to have to backtrack and talk a little bit about the energy systems that your body uses when you are going for a run or getting on a bike or going cross-country skiing. But what are the different energy systems your body deploys when you are trying to move it in a repetitive manner over and over again for longer stretches of time? So, let's just imagine that you are doing a couch to 5K. You have been kind of sedentary for a chunk of your adult life, but you're now like, hey, I want to do a 5K, or maybe you've signed up for a sprint triathlon, or maybe you are going to do your first bike race or something like that. So as you move from an idle body that's not moving at all out to an all-out sprint, something that maybe you could do for 5 or 10 seconds, your body uses different parts of your physiology to power those movements. It's this incredibly complex series of adaptations that have been accomplished over millions of years, and the end result is the human body that you own today. So, for ease of explanation, we're going to break down these energy systems into 4 groups. Now, physiologists everywhere would kind of freak out about that a little bit, but since today's show, we're really talking about beginning endurance sport and getting into things for the first time. We're going to keep things pretty simple because actually it is a little simpler than it gets made out to be most of the time. Physiologists have to do research. They have to really parse things very finely in order to figure out what is going on in an experimental setting. If you listen to the show with Phil Batterson a couple weeks ago, he and I talked about the differences between coaching and physiology. Both are really important, but for ease of information, because this is going to be one of the things we get to later on, that complexity is part of how companies kind of prey on people who are new to the sport through a big, let's make this super complicated so you can't possibly figure out what's going on. So we're going to cut through all of that BS today. So the first level of effort and the first energy system that we're going to talk about, we might call trivial. When you have not done any endurance training or any endurance sport, basically, this intensity is walking. It's the only endurance activity that you currently practice. If you haven't been a runner, if you haven't been a cyclist, anything like that. Hopefully, you do spend some time each day walking. The effort is essentially unnoticeable. Obviously, if you decide to go out and go for a hike, walking for 4, 5, 6 hours, that is no longer trivial, but we're going to get into all of that and how that basically might work. So first level, we're just going to call trivial. Now our next level of intensity, we're just going to call endurance. This is a vague term, but that vagueness is kind of intentional. It's an intensity above trivial and what you might describe as moderate. And the best way to identify this endurance intensity is what's known as the talk test. Can you hold a conversation while you are running, cycling? You're not going to talk while you're swimming, but you kind of get the idea. Can you hold a conversation while you're doing it? And, I'm going to use this moment to remind everybody, a conversation is something where you talk and then the other person gets a chance to talk. If you can say a complete sentence or a sentence and a half, and then there's a gap for the other person to talk, then that's when you're kind of recovering. You're very much in this kind of second intensity level, what we call endurance. Okay, the next energy system we're going to talk about today is at the very top of that endurance range, and we're going to call that threshold training. Now, those of you that have some experience in endurance sports already might be like, wait, Chris, what about tempo? What about sweet spot? So, this is a nice little moment to make a digression to talk about this whole idea of zones that gets tossed around in endurance sport. Right now, zone two is really having this big moment in the endurance world. And honestly, your physiology doesn't really work in these like very neatly sliced different tranches of your physiology. Coley Moore at Empirical Cycling, if you don't listen, go listen, has a really great term for this threshold. He calls it spicy endurance. And we'll get into this another time, but threshold is very much part of your endurance engine. At first, and probably the first like couple of years what you are doing endurance sports, it's not going to feel that way. Threshold is an intensity where you can still communicate, but it's likely only single words. Your breathing is involuntary, so that means you're not in control of it anymore. But it's not ragged, it's not gasping, it's not desperate. If you bumped up the intensity just a little bit, it would become ragged, desperate, but we're not quite there yet. When you're at this intensity, your muscles are probably burning a little bit, and you have to focus most of your attention on what you're doing. Maybe like 80 to 90% of your attention has to be focused on maintaining this level of effort. So threshold is hard, but it's still part of the endurance kind of range. Okay, the next step up and the top of the pyramid, so we've got trivial, endurance, threshold, and now the top we're going to call speed. Again, all of this is a real oversimplification, but since we're talking about how your body is going to respond when you are new, this is why we're kind of boiling things down into just 4 different energy systems. So if you want to think about steps 1, sort of, but steps 2 and 3, endurance and threshold, those are intensities that you want to do for a longer amount of time. Most of your training, when you're going to be working on endurance and threshold, is going to be extending the amount of time each week that you spend at those energy systems. But speed is something where you're trying to go faster. So when we do speed intervals, a lot of the time, the prescription is just going to be like, hey, I just want you to go out there and I want you to run as hard as you can for the amount of time that we prescribe this interval. Speed intervals are usually really short. They might be as short as 30 seconds. Maybe if you're really experienced, they might get out as long as like 5 or 6 minutes, but that's kind of rare air. That's going to be for somebody who has a really robustly developed endurance and aerobic system. So as you train, the goal is for your speed intervals to get faster, and then the endurance and threshold intensities to get longer. So this is a little bit of like, we're kind of doing this in a hurry up because I really do want to get to talking about Noob Gains, but we kind of need to do a little groundwork here to make sure that we can go on to the next step of talking about what we're going to talk about. So, okay, part 2. What are Noob Gains? That is Noob. It's sort of a hard word to enunciate. So it comes from newbie, and these are the gains that you see when you have made endurance training and maybe racing, you don't need to race to be an endurance athlete, a habit. So if you are a start-stop athlete, so somebody who never truly incorporates training into your life, you will also experience noob gains, but the sad thing for you is that you're just going to be experiencing the same noob gains over and over as you start to train and then give it up for a little bit and detrain. This is not a fun cycle. This usually happens in athletes who don't actually like the sport that they've chosen, or they've chosen it because they think that they're going to get some extrinsic benefit, such as only weight loss. You know, maybe they're like, oh, I really hate running. I really hate the idea of cycling, but you know what? I think I could probably lose some weight if I did those. that's not enough motivation. So weight loss alone is one of the things that usually has people kind of come in and out of the sport in a on again, off again manner. Other ones are things like social capital, and then also things like emotional and psychological stuff, like shoring up your sense of self. Those are goals that probably aren't going to keep you in the sport because those are external to you. When you want to get better at something and you want to enjoy it and incorporate it into your existence for a long period, your motivation has to be intrinsic. It's got to be internal. You've got to like what you're doing. And we're assuming that you're here at the infirmary because your goal is performance. And performance doesn't mean that you're like super fast or you're super pro or like you're mean to other people. It just means that you want to do more than you have done in the past. So performance, you could be here because you're trying to be the best in the world at something, or you just might be trying to improve at something and have like a great series of goals that are going to be difficult for you. And that's all that matters. The message here is that this process of noob gains is only temporary, and they result from a habitual change in your behavior from someone who doesn't train to someone who does. Okay, how long does it take? When are you going to see these amazing gains from your new endurance sport? So they take place over a variable timeline, which is completely dependent on you. How much do you train each week? And more crucially, how often do you rest so you allow your body to absorb the training that you give it? If you train a lot, then you're going to see your noob gains unfold over a short amount of time before you pass out of this period. And we're going to talk a little bit about what that looks like when you finally exit the noob gains. If you train just a little bit, then, that period of noob gains is going to go on for a longer time. This is just totally due to the nature of endurance training, which is a dose and response model. So if you think about each workout as like a pill that has a certain effect, a bigger dose results in a bigger effect, up to a point. If you've ever heard in pharmacological terms the concept of a minimum lethal dose, that's the lowest known amount of a drug that can kill an organism in a controlled environment. We don't mean to imply that training can kill you. I mean, it can, but that's not what we're doing today, and that's kind of an extreme example. But more to use the concept as an illustration of the point that more of something is better, but only up to a point where it stops being better and actually it begins to move you in the wrong direction. Okay, why are noob gains amazing? Hold on a bit. We'll try to be quick here. When you're sedentary, when you're getting up off the couch and you haven't done any running or cycling or anything like that, any increase in effort feels like a maximal effort. So like if you go from a walk to a slow jog, if you haven't done any jogging, within a few minutes, you're going to be gasping. You're going to be bent over, holding your knees. Your body's not used to this. So think about yourself as a car that only has 2 throttle settings at the moment. Basically like an idle where the car is just like very slowly crawling forward. Like, if your automatic transmission, when you pop it into drive and you don't touch the accelerator at all, the car will still probably kind of crawl forward a little bit. That's your walk. And then you trying to jog is you just mashing that accelerator pedal all the way to the floor. So at this point in your journey, you really only have 2 gears. So you signed up for your first 5K, you head out the door for your first run, and that minor increase from walking to jogging is going to quickly become unsustainable. Your body is not ready for this effort. Now, that doesn't mean you can't do this. Endurance training requires a growth mindset or a belief that things can and will change. But I get it. It can feel really discouraging to go outside and the first time you try to go for a run, be like, oh my God, I can't do this. Here's the thing that will make you feel better. So when you go out to do a workout, that is not when your body is going to change. Your body changes when you give it a demand that it presently cannot meet, and then you give it some time to rebuild itself so that it can meet that challenge again in the future. Your workout is a signal to your body that you're going to be moving it in a different way going forward now that you've got this great new habit of endurance training. And if your body wants to come along with you, it's going to have to make some internal adjustments. So what happens is the workout sends the message to your body, which at first is confused and alarmed. Those uncomfortable feelings that you're feeling when you are training for the first time is your body and brain saying, hey, Chris, it would be way nicer if we just sat around and ate Thin Mints. I think that would be a lot more fun than doing what you're doing. But eventually your body grudgingly gets on board and kind of comes along with you for the rest of the session. Then once you get home and you rest, your body sets about altering itself to meet this new demand. So think about your body as a group of construction workers, and they never want to exert more energy than they need to achieve the job at hand. They're old pros. They've been doing this for a long time, and they really know that finishing jobs takes time and it takes pacing. So these construction workers, they might grumble at first, but once you get them to a job, they'll get to building. So you've signaled to these workers that your car, I guess maybe your auto mechanics, the metaphor is starting to get a little wild, but that your car needs more gears than idle or drag race. In your body, which has now been very slightly damaged by the run that you just went on, sets to rebuilding itself so that it can handle this new activity that your brain seems dead set on inflicting upon your body. And while you're resting, something magical happens. This is called the principle of supercompensation. Supercompensation happens when you stress your body and then you rest it. After resting, your body can do more than it could before you stressed it. This is the magic. This is how you actually improve at endurance sports. Okay. Next big question, and now we're really getting into the nitty-gritty of what Noob Gains are and why they're so amazing. Noob Gains are marvelous. Like when you start training and you make it habitual and you're training regularly, you improve a lot quickly. And this happens in all aspects of your life, not just endurance training. Think about when you pick up a new skill. At first, and this depends on the technical nature of the skill, but when you begin practicing for the first time, you're going to make a big jump in skill just in the first few weeks and months. And then, of course, just like anything, just like Noob Gains going away, those are going to tail off at some point, and you're going to hit this point of diminishing returns. But if you stick with it during your Noob Gains period and you're not that athlete who is starting and stopping that we talked about before, then you are really going to see yourself improve an amazing amount in a very short period of time. So why does this happen? So during this Noob Gains period, every part of your endurance engine gets stressed. And this is why we did that legwork at the beginning of the show today, where we talked about trivial, endurance, threshold, and speed. So here's how I want you to think about this. So imagine taking a rope, and it's got 4 knots in it. So each knot corresponds to one of those energy systems that we mentioned above: trivial, endurance, threshold, and speed. In fact, okay, you know me in metaphors. Let's keep adding. Let's do this with 2 ropes. They both have 4 knots in it. One of them represents you, the beginner athlete, and 1 represents the experienced athlete that you're going to become in a few years' time. So in your mind, I want you to, you're looking at the ground, and closest to you is the newbie rope. So that's like maybe right at your feet. And then put the experienced rope maybe 2 or 3 feet away. So it looks like it is above the beginner rope. So when an experienced athlete trains, and that's sort of farther away from you, like if we're thinking about that as a graph or a chart or something like that. So think about really close to you is somebody that doesn't have a lot of ability yet. And so that experienced endurance athlete who's a few feet away, the rope on the ground, they've been training for a while. So the fact that they're a few feet away is to depict that they have more fully developed endurance systems, all 4 of them. So that's why we've put it above the beginner rope. So when that experienced athlete trains, most of the workouts that they do are already within their capabilities. They're not going through most of the time what you experience as a beginner, where you just go out and, oh my gosh, like just a jog from a walk is almost beyond you. Once you've experienced a large amount of endurance training in your career, a lot of the workouts that you do are simply there to keep what you have created. And there's more complexities about how much hard work that one can do in a week before getting injured or sick or burned out or anything like that. But anyway, most of the workouts an experienced athlete does are simply to just kind of keep a hold of the gains that they have already created. So this experienced athlete, though, they need to work on their threshold. That's sort of the thing that they and their coach, or if they're a self-coached athlete, have decided that they need to be working on at this particular moment. So when they go out for a threshold workout, they are aiming to move the knot that corresponds to the threshold energy system up, And so again, if we think about this as a bottom to top, we're trying to always move the knots up in order to improve our performances. So they go out and they do a workout that is going to stress the threshold system, hoping to move that knot up slightly. The other energy systems are not as stressed by the workout because they're already pretty well developed and you're not training them. So, maybe to stress the endurance system, this athlete might have to go out and do like a 4 or 5 hour bike ride or a 2-hour run or something like that, something that is beyond their current endurance systems. And maybe this threshold workout is only 90 minutes long, so it's not going to stress that endurance system. It's certainly not stressing the trivial system because that's probably really well developed. And it's not intense enough to stress the speed system. So this athlete already has their 4 systems pretty well developed. So in order to improve, they need to focus on certain energy systems in each workout. But when a beginner athlete starts training, when a newbie starts training, every one of those knots gets challenged because every one of those energy systems is untrained. The trivial part, the endurance part, the threshold part, the speed part, all of them are basically at, 0 or close to 0. And so doing any kind of work is going to stress out all of them. So the experienced athlete goes out and they can only work on one system. The beginner athlete, whatever they do, every energy system can't meet the demand of what they're trying to do. So this cuts both ways. In one side, oh my gosh, if all 4 systems get stressed at the same time, then everything improves at once. And for you to become a fully developed endurance athlete, more on this later, you need to build all 4 of those energy systems. Maybe not the trivial one so much, that gets used a little bit more for recovery, but it's sort of a niche case, and so we're just going to say all 4 anyway. The reason it cuts both ways is that if you go and stress all 4 energy systems when you go out for a workout, oh my gosh, you are going to get a lot more tired quickly. And this makes sense, right? when you begin, you can't run or ride or swim or ski or row for as long or as fast as an experienced athlete. And that's because you are basically doing 4 workouts every time you go out to do a workout, whereas the experienced athlete is only doing a single energy system. And then that newbie athlete goes home and, through the magic of super compensation, every knot moves up. So again, just to reiterate, the experienced athlete can only work pretty much on 1 energy system per 1 workout. And you can't go out and do like speed every day because you're going to get hurt. And so the experience of an athlete that's well trained is that gains take a lot longer. But noob gains, because you are literally stressing every energy system every time you go out for any workout, you're going to get a lot faster, a lot quicker, because you're improving every aspect of your endurance engine. So noob gains are amazing, right? They're awesome. You can be in the noob gain phase anywhere from a few months up to a year, maybe a year and a half. Again, it depends on how much you train each week. And now we're going to kind of get to our warning. So unscrupulous exercise industry companies understand physiology. They understand how your body works and everything like that. And they know that newer athletes benefit from these noob gains. So a lot of times these companies will do things like they'll offer like time crunched training plans, and they will promise you that you can swap out volume and replace it with intensity as your key to success. And they're going to say things like massive threshold gains on 6 to 8 hours of training a week. If that sounds too good to be true, that's because it is. What these companies are doing is they're just throwing anything they want at you, knowing that anything will make you faster, and then they are taking credit for your noob gains. And that sucks. And the reason it sucks is because after a little while, the gains go away as you become a more trained athlete. So there's been a big movement recently about high intensity interval training, along with the big movement of zone 2 training. In the past, we've had sweet spot training as the thing that's like, ooh, that's the cat's pajamas or the bee's knees or whatever. That's the thing that's going to make you a lot faster. We've talked about this in the previous show with Phil, that the way to get faster is really through a very balanced approach, where you're really trying to hit all of the energy systems in your body in order to get better, and to get better for a longer period of time. We'll talk more about this in an upcoming show about how to effectively train once you've gotten through this noob gains period. But let's take high intensity interval training as an example. There's a lot of companies out there that are like, do these workouts, they're short, they're half an hour, they're 40 minutes, look really hard. They are, they feel productive because they're so hard, and they fit really neatly into our overly focused on things like no pain, no gain, and all sorts of toxic labels, honestly. So high intensity interval training. One of the biggest benefits when you do high intensity interval training is an increase in blood volume. And, if you're kind of picking up what I've been laying down so far, that period of super compensation, a whole bunch of physical adaptations happen in your body as you begin endurance training. You make more mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell. You actually build new capillaries, tiny little blood vessels. You get better at oxidizing fat, so burning fat as a fuel. In some cases, you can do things like you can actually make the chambers of your heart a little bit more elastic, and you can make them pump more blood. There's so many things, so many interventions that you can do that will then change your physiology, because your construction workers will adapt to the job or the stress that you're giving them. So blood volume, that is one thing that really responds to high intensity interval training, because when you're doing high intensity, you need to deliver more oxygen. That's the currency of endurance performance. And if you have more blood, whether it's more red blood cells or just a higher volume of fluid, so that's plasma and red blood cells, you need a higher volume of blood to deliver the oxygen to your muscles. So you sign up for one of these high intensity interval training programs. It kind of rocks your world. The workouts are super hard, but your body is increasing blood volume, and then you're going to get fast or faster really quickly. Unfortunately, blood volume gains really stop after a few weeks. So you see all this progress and things are going really well and you're getting faster, but then because like basically the only adaptation that you're asking your body to make is blood volume, that's a little bit of an oversimplification. If you were doing all high intensity interval training, there would be some other adaptations you would be making as well, but not the crucial ones of basically endurance or threshold below it. So you're doing these high intensity interval training workouts, you're getting better for several weeks, and then they just stop because your blood volume has kind of plateaued. And you're like, gosh, you know what? I think I probably just need to do more. The problem is probably me, not the program. This is what the company wants you to think. And so you double down and you actually start doing more high intensity. This is just classic. I don't want to just say American thinking, though we are really good at this sort of kind of skewed and maladaptive thinking that like more is always more, bigger is always better, all those things. Shout out to Michael Chabon and Cleveland's will to bigness. There, that's your one nerdy shout out for the show. So maybe you're doing 2 high intensity interval training sessions a week and you're like, these gains aren't happening anymore. I'm going to do 4. Well, sorry to tell you, you've already maxed out that blood volume change. That's not going to be possible until you do some other kind of training. You're doing 4 or 5 high intensity interval training sessions a week. You start heading down the path of being overly fatigued because high intensity is really hard on your body. You might start burning out. You might get sick. If it's running, you might get injured. And the company that's been taking your money just kind of shrugs and maybe reminds you that you signed a waiver and it's not their responsibility. And it's probably you. It's probably your fault. So just a cautionary tale here. Don't let a company gaslight you by taking credit for your body's natural adaptations and then telling you that it's your fault when they stop improving anymore. Because you're not going through this Noob Gains period in a sensible and structured way. Really, like if you're new to the sport, as we've pointed out so far, every single workout will make you better. It'll improve your endurance. It'll improve your threshold. It'll improve all aspects of the speed part of your engine. And this is when we could kind of start breaking things down a little more granularly. In that speed area, you might have VO2 max. VO2 max is another thing that's really having a moment right now with mortality ideas and whatnot and all that stuff. In this performance paradigm, VO2 max is really about oxygen delivery. It's right there in the word, O2. That's what we're trying to do. The fastest rate of oxygen absorption that your body can handle. That's one part of speed. Anaerobic ability, so when you're above VO2 max, because remember, it's got O2 in it, it's using oxygen, it's aerobic. Anaerobic capacity is above that, and those intervals are really short. 30 seconds to maybe 90 seconds where you're truly going absolutely all out. In the endurance zone, we probably have endurance, and then some of this other stuff that you've probably been familiar with before. Tempo, sweet spot, threshold. If you're a fan of lactate testing and you talk about this stuff in LT1 and LT2 as like the big physiological breakpoints of your body, the endurance part is like a little below LT1 all the way to just below LT2. That's kind of that whole thing where we get the first uptick in blood lactate all the way to the point where lactate accumulation basically becomes exponential and goes through the roof. And then beyond that, we're in the speed zone. Getting a little lost here, but just wanting to say that there is more complexity than the way I'm approaching this with endurance, threshold, and speed. And what is going on, as we've pointed out already, is that all of these aspects are improving as you're just going out for an endurance run. You know, you're improving VO2 max, you're improving anaerobic capacity because you probably can't just keep running for very long. This is why really sensible, like couch to 5K programs have a lot of run and walk in them, because the authors of those plans know that if you run for 2 minutes, you're like in anaerobic distress. You're gasping, it's super hard, it's really uncomfortable, and it makes you want to stop. And so a good training program might be something like, for your first few runs, run for 2 minutes, walk for 2 minutes. And what that'll do is that will sort of drop the average intensity of the entire workout. And now we are stressing everything, but it's not so hard that after 5 minutes, you're like, fuck this. I am out of here. I'm not doing this anymore. So Noob Gains are amazing. When you're getting going, really just go out and do your sport. Enjoy your sport. If you're getting into cycling, for the first like 6 months, just ride your bike. Like if it is fun for you and you kind of like, oh, I want to go fast, like throw in some like silly little sprints here and there that make you feel like an endurance athlete, that make you imagine the endurance athlete that you are becoming. If you are a swimmer, you know, keep it moderate, you know, swim easy to moderate intervals, like hundreds, 150s, maybe 200s, use buoy and paddles, like do everything you can to keep the intensity of the workout very tranquilo, because you don't need to go any faster than that. You're going to get all of the benefits that you need from just going out and doing the sport. And this is when you can really build your love of the sport. This is when you can build your future longevity in the sport. It all has to start from joy, and it all has to start from happiness of actually liking what you're doing. Please, if you don't like endurance sports, do something else. Play pickleball, pick up squash, pick up adult basketball, join a softball league, join a dodgeball league. Do something that moves your body. But if you hate the idea of running, you don't have to run. And this period of Noob Gains is when you can really, really enjoy the sport, grow your engine safely, and again, everything makes you faster, so just get out there and enjoy it. And if you do that, you will have built a really solid foundation for continuing in the sport for a long time, both physiologically, intellectually, and emotionally. You know, those are the three big parts of what's going to make you a great athlete over time. We call it PI: physical, intellectual, and emotional. And yes, there is an S to this component also, spiritual. We're not going to get into that today. I'm not going to inflict ideas of spirituality upon you if you are here because you just want to explore getting into endurance sports for the first time. But I would just say that one of the glories of endurance sports is that it is something that you do with a lot of other people. It is a chance to be part of something bigger than you, which is the definition of spirituality. So we're getting a little off track here, but I think it's a great place to end, to remember PIs: physical, intellectual, emotional, spiritual. During these periods of Noob Gains, we can develop all of those also. Because yes, we want to be faster, we want to be more enduring, we want to be healthier, we want to be happier. So we're not just talking about the physiological. You really need to enjoy the sport. Okay. I hope that was helpful. If you got any questions, please send us an email or drop them in the down belows. And next time, we are going to talk about what happens when you move out of the Noob Gains phase. And that's going to be fun. And we will see you in 1 month. Thanks for listening, everybody.